G'day guys, this is Andrew Price here from BlenderGuru.com, and once again I'm putting my face on camera because I'm selling something. It's pretty much the only reason to do this. I got an upcoming course coming out. It's called the Architecture Academy. It's going to teach you how to create realistic architecture using Blender and Cycles. So that's why I've got a nice backdrop here of some cityscape here in South Korea. Actually standing on my office apartment rooftop right now. Which is, I think there's actually a fire going on. There's like smoke and I can smell fire. Anyway, you didn't tune in to hear me talk about fire. We're here to talk about architecture. Architecture is a hot topic. In the last few years, it has taken off and everybody is interested in it. And that's the reason I designed the Architecture Academy. I put a survey up on Facebook about a year ago and I asked you guys, what's the next big thing you want to learn about? And you all clicked on architecture, which was a bummer for me at the time because I knew nothing about architecture. So I was like, all right, I gotta read some books. And I did. I read some books and I tried to pick up as much as I could. And I slowly began to understand sorry, there's weird stuff going on down there. The topic of architecture, and it all started to make sense for me. So that's why I'm making this video for you. The Beginner's Guide to Architecture, a complete introduction. Because when I first started learning it, I noticed that there's a lot of stuff put out there for experts and people that have gone through university and all this kind of stuff. And they're all just discussing these very advanced topics. But for a beginner, you want to learn, like, what's the point of architecture? Can I get hired doing this? Do I need a formal education? Where should I get started? Etc., etc. These big questions, and nobody was answering them. So I'm putting out this video for you guys, so you don't have to go through the trouble that I went through. So hope you enjoy it. I'm going to jump over to the computer right now, and we're going to get cracking in PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you a complete introduction to architecture. Let's go. Alright, so here we are, a complete introduction to architecture in plain English. So all of your architecture questions should be answered in this presentation, which is a tall order, but we're going to try it. So here we go. Alright, in this video, we're going to be covering a number of different topics. The first thing though we're going to cover is what the point of architecture rendering is. I think is a good one to start off with. What's the actual practical uses of it in the real world? Why you should even care? It's an even more important one. The hot topic of formal education. Do you need to go to university? And then a big one, a walkthrough of the principles, and this is where most of the good stuff is going to come in. And then finally, where to begin. So first things first, let's talk about what the point of architecture rendering is. Like, I mean, you know, when you think about it, it's a bit obscure, the fact that there are so many 3D artists out there creating buildings. You know, it's I don't know. I guess it's kind of weird. Like, what's the practical uses of it? Like, when does somebody actually transfer money into somebody else's hand for this skill? So there are a number of different uses for it, a number of different real-world values. The first one is to visualize an architect's plan for investors. So this is like, for example, they want to build a high-rise. An architect might have an idea and they want to sell it to the investors. Like, this is my idea for the building. The investors don't want to see a bunch of floor plans because it's pretty hard to visualize how that's going to look. They want to see it in the form of, you know, like a 3D model. So this is probably the most dry and boring of renders. It's like completely accurate. There's no atmosphere or emotion in it. It's basically a screenshot from your 3D software. So yeah, pretty dry, pretty boring, and it's not covered in the Architecture Academy at all because it's just, I mean, you can figure it out yourself. You just take a screenshot. Number two is to visualize a property for buyers. Okay, so this is in the instance like if you go to a what's it called, a real estate office, and you walk in there and they're like trying to sell you some like a floor for an apartment that doesn't exist yet, and they'll have like, you know, this is what your lounge room is going to look like, and then they'll have like, you know, cardboard cutouts of people like sitting in the lounge room, and the wife is like in the kitchen cutting up stuff, and they got like cardboard cutouts of people and all that kind of stuff. So that's like selling a lifestyle. So that's the ones which you sometimes see online of people that are actually working for architecture studios, and that's obviously a lot more interesting than the first category, but it's yeah, pretty different than I suppose what most people are interested in, which is the third category, and that's simply to make pretty pictures. So this isn't so much used in the practical world of architectural visualization, because I mean, a lot of artists, like for example, this piece of artwork on the right hand side here, that would fall into category number 3. And in the real world, you don't really have that long to create you know, like a project. A lot of people are working on like a deadline of about 1 week, whereas, you know, a lot of artists like to just spend a lot of time perfecting their craft and making a desirable looking image. So a lot of, I'd say 90% of the architectural renders that you see online nowadays fall into that third category. However, it does have value because it makes your portfolio look good, and it's a very desirable skill for other employees. But let's get into the second topic, and we'll cover that in a bit more. So why you should even care about architectural rendering. If you've ever sort of like woken up in the morning, gazed up at the ceiling, and sort of thought like, what am I doing with my life? You know, I'm a 3D artist, you know, where do I fit into this whole grand scale of the world? If you've never had that profound sort of thought before, you will someday, I'm sure. And it can sort of help to know where you are grounded, you know, like where you're actually providing value. So the first thing, I guess, is that architectural rendering is a strong industry, and so they're always in demand. There's lots of job availabilities because there's lots of buildings being built everywhere. It's a massive industry. In fact, right outside my window, my office right now, there is construction work going on a apartment right next door. So I have to sort of time my tutorials around their construction, which is interesting. Next part is that it gives you skills which can be applied to other industries. So even if you're not interested in getting a job in architectural visualization, because I know a lot of people aren't, but they are still interested in creating architectural renders, the skills that you learn in creating interesting architectural renders is useful to other industries, such as just like animation or working for a studio or something like that. Because I mean, it's like basic stuff like composition, texturing, post-processing, all those different things, lighting, very important topics for just 3D artistry, I guess. Yeah. So it's very useful to other industries. So it looks great on your portfolio. There's a lot of really dry and boring architecture renders out there that I'm sure you've seen, or perhaps even created yourself. I know I have in the past. And a lot of people just can't do it. So if you can create emotion and something that just looks amazing and just, you know, gets a reaction from people when they look at it, on a topic which is quite boring, such as architectural rendering, then that shows that you have skills. I mean, if you can make a building like have an emotional reaction to people, then you obviously know what you're doing. So it looks great in a portfolio against other people that obviously don't know what they're doing. And then attractive skill to have. Pretty much I've covered that. It just looks good to other employers. Yeah, potential employers. All right, let's talk about the hot topic of formal education. I think this is important. A lot of people are curious, you know, do I need to go to university to get a degree in architecture in order to work in the industry? And that's a very good question. Short answer, no, you don't. This is a few snippets that I got from one thread on CG Society. So this is a guy that's been working in the industry for 3 years. He says, you do not need an architecture degree or background to work in ArchViz. though it does help. He went on to say that it helps in the sense that you can understand some of the lingo that a lot of architects use, and the workflow process that goes into it and things like that. If you have a bit of background, it can sort of help you just sort of communicate with a client and things like that. But again, it's not necessary. This person said, just make sure you have a solid portfolio of what you can do, and the lack of an ARC degree will be quickly overlooked. And this person said, when they see amazing work by somebody without a degree in architecture, this requirement goes out the window. And there's the link there if you're curious on reading up on that as well. Furthermore, to make the point, several of the legendary architectural artists out there, such as Alex Roman, Bertrand Benoit, they have had no formal education. So that just goes to show you that you really don't need it. And then there are some people out there that have had formal education, and they create some really dry work as well. So having an education really does not play that much of an impact on whether or not you can get a job. So that's good to know, isn't it? I think it's pretty good. All right, let's talk about the next topic, which is the big one. We're going to talk about the workflow of architecture rendering. So this is the different parts that go into actually creating a finished work. So I, from reading all those books and stuff like that, came up with something I called the fundamentals pyramid, which is, if you can understand this pyramid and the different parts of it, then you'll become a good architecture rendering artist. So the pyramid goes like this. The foundation, if you can have an understanding for the design of architecture, that's the first part. Then moving inside the building, the interior design, creating a building interior that looks attractive, and the furniture, matches and all that kind of stuff. The lighting, that's very important, creating appealing interior lighting. The camera work, this one is sort of like almost trumps all the others, but it's really, really, really important. That's like where you place the camera in order to get an appealing render. And then finally, to top it off, you got post-processing at the top there, which is, of course, adding in the finishing touches to an image. So what I'm going to do now is just give you a quick run through of these 5 different elements. Now, this stuff is, it really does require, several hours to sort of discuss, and that's why in the Architecture Academy I go into great detail. Like, each one of these topics has its own video, but I'm going to give you a rundown of them now, like a sort of quick drive-by version of these topics. So the first one is designing architecture. Okay, so this is having an understanding for the art of actually designing a building, so the structure and things like that. So I'll give you 5 tips for if you're wanting to get started today. If you're wanting to design your own unique building, the first tip I would give you is that you should design a building for a purpose. So don't just think, I'm going to design a modern house. Because generally you fall into the trap of just copying what everybody else has done from just a number of different inspiration sources in your head. If you think about designing a building for a purpose, that is a much, much better idea, because you'll then start to think about basically making the building interesting, and basically every building should have a purpose, to put it in a nutshell. And furthermore, through that, the beauty of the building will come through its purity of its function. So that means it's, and this applies to all aspects of design, not just architecture, like designing the iPod or the Dyson vac and things like that. The function is number one. If it fails to function as a building or as an iPod, or I don't know, whatever, to vacuum a floor, then anything else, any other beauty that comes through its design is going to be unattractive. Number one is its function. So that's why basically the purpose of the building is so important, because you need to nail that down and figure out exactly what the building is going to be used for, and then through that the beauty will come out of it. When you're thinking about creating a room, such as a lounge room, you want to shape the room for their intended purpose. So instead of putting up 4 walls and then trying to put some furniture in between those walls, instead put the furniture in first and then build the walls around that. Essentially doing the opposite way that most people do when they move into a house. You should be essentially designing a room for where people are going to go, where people are going to sit, the through traffic and things like that should all have an impact on the size of the room. So yeah, basically build the room around its purpose. You never want to add pointless doodads. They say that a good architect should be able to provide at least 2 reasons behind every design choice in the finished design. So by adding doodads, I mean like adding little decorations and little, I don't know, bevels and nuts and stuff on the outside of a building, or I don't know. You basically, if you're just copying what other people have done, that's a really, really bad way to design a building, and it's an awful trap to fall into. So again, you want to have a reason behind everything that you're doing. And then finally, as a general rule, all architecture should share a connection with nature or its surrounding, if it's in a city or something like that. The best nature, they say, this is by, I'm quoting Frank Lloyd Wright here, where he said, the best architecture doesn't, oh, what was the quote? I can't even remember. It's like, it doesn't make a landscape worse, but it actually improves a landscape. And the landscape is more interesting because the building is there, not the opposite. So that kind of thing. It's very interesting. Anyway, okay, so that's designing architecture. Again, this is a very dense topic and should really be discussed in more detail, but that's just the basics of it there. Next is the interior design. Okay, so this is, of course, designing an appealing room. So how do you fill a room with furniture and decorations in order to make it look appealing? So this is a very interesting topic, and one that there is a surprising lack of documentation for. Like if you try to find the answers online, it's a surprisingly empty topic. But essentially, what I've learned is that the number one thing is that the interior design is really for, it's up to the individual that is going to live in that area. So as an artist, if you're making a building, if you're making a room, such as a lounge room, you don't just want to think like, okay, I'm going to make a lounge room. Because then you just start putting in like, oh, what's in a lounge room? Couch, coffee table, I don't know, some flowers in the background. And you just start chucking in elements that don't really have any relation to each other. And then at the end of it, you get a really boring, dry looking render. The number one thing you should be thinking about is a specific individual in mind. So who is going to be living in this area? Is it a family? Is it like one dude? How old is that dude? Is he 30? Does he, what's he interested in? Is he interested in design or architecture? Or is he sort of like, I don't know, businessman or something like that? And basically, the more specific you can make this individual, like it's almost like come up with a storybook for their life, then basically the interior design will come automatically through that. You won't even really have to think about it. You just have to think from the point of view of whoever's going to live in that space, and everything else will just come out of that. There are, of course, a few other rules. Another very important rule is to ensure that all the elements have a harmony of each other. So that means if it's a modern room, everything in the room needs to look modern. If it's like a traditional sort of oldie English style room, then you can't have something modern in the room. Everything needs to have a harmony of each other. To put it in an example, they say, for example, if... Example. If you were to think about your 5 favorite wardrobe items, so let's say pick out your favorite shirt, your favorite pants, your favorite pair of shoes, your favorite hat, your favorite sunglasses, I don't know, and you were to wear them all at the same time, like try to walk down the street and not get laughed at. The beauty comes through the harmony of all the elements, not the individual elements together. So that's a very, very important point, and it's one that you really need to think about with your design. You need to be thinking about the entire picture, not just, oh, that looks pretty, I'm going to put that in my scene, because it often won't fit. This is a general rule for color design. You want to use predominantly neutral colors. So this is blacks, whites, grays, and browns. If you're not sure what colors to use, just stick with those and you'll be fine pretty much. You should use color sparingly anyway. So those colors, those very neutral looking colors, should make up about 80% of your final sort of image, like the percentage wise of the image. You know what I mean. You shouldn't be using too heavy colors. So if you're not sure what colors to use, stick to those and you'll be safe. You want to balance the room with equal weight. So this is talking about you don't want to have like on one side of the room this really super thick, heavy looking couch, and then on the other side of the room like a tiny coffee table. You know, it's got to be equal. The same applies to composition when you're talking about the camera work and stuff like that. It just has to make sense. Like you can't have a room which has just got all the furniture on one side or all the furniture on the floor and you've got like the bare ceiling. That's a very common mistake as well. Everything needs to be equal. So you want to think about adding visual texture to walls, different things like that in order to make it look appealing. And it also needs to suit the size of the room. So don't go chucking in a massive couch into a tiny space because that will just look out of place. And then finally, what I kind of said this before, but you want to keep the colors and patterns to a minimum. They say that if you use too many saturated colors and too many heavy patterns, then people in the room will feel irritated eventually. And then on the other end of the scale, if you use too few, like if it's a very boring, dry looking scene, then people will just feel bored eventually. So you want to find that middle ground where you've got a few splashes of color here and there, you've got a little bit of texture on the walls, a little bit of artwork here and there, but you don't want to go overboard as well, where people are just kind of like anxious sitting in there, you know? When I say sitting in there, by the way, we're talking about artwork, you know, 3D artwork. So obviously nobody's sitting in this area, but the same rules apply to a finished image as it does to the real world. So that's what I'm talking about. Next one, lighting. This one is exciting because I know a lot of people are confused about interior lighting, and it's even messed up in the real world. I read a book by this lighting, designing appealing lighting. I read a book by a residential interior designing artist, and he said even in the real world, people will like hire an architect, they'll hire an interior designer, they'll hire all these experts, engineers, everything else, and then at the end of it, when they're moving their furniture and stuff in, they'll go, oh yeah, we got to add in some lighting. Like people think of it as like an afterthought, like, oh, we just got to put in a bit of fluorescent light bulb here and there, and you know, but it makes a huge impact on the mood and the atmosphere of the environment once the sun goes down. It's a massive part of our day-to-day life, and it's so easily overlooked, not just in 3D artwork, but also in the real world. So here's a few tips for you. The biggest tip I can give you is pretty much makes up most of it. There are 4 categories or 4 purposes for each light source. Okay, so a good room will have all 4 of these purposes in the one room. It's called layered lighting. Okay, so there is accent lighting. What that is like halogen downlights over seating areas or a bedding area, something like that. So areas of interest, visual interest. Then task lighting. That's lighting which is used for tasks such as reading a book, like chopping up vegetables. And that light needs to be placed between the eye line and where the human being's hands would be. I don't know why I said human being. The person's hands, right? So it needs to be somewhere in between that, not over the top of their head. So it needs to be, task lighting. Decorative lighting. This is the one that everyone thinks about when they get into lighting, because it's what everybody's drawn to, and it's the one that sells the most in shops. The pretty lighting, the stuff that looks nice, you know, like the like hexagonal, weird looking modern shape that's hanging from the ceiling with this cool light in the middle of it. And everyone goes, ooh, yeah, that's modern, that's cool, you know. Everyone wants to buy that. Everyone wants to put that in their scene, in their renders and stuff like that. But actually, in the real world, decorative lighting should not actually be used to light up the room. It should be decorative. And the idea is to create the illusion as though the decorative lighting is what is lighting up the room. So it's like an illusion, it's a magic trick. Kind of interesting. And then the 4th purpose is the one that is the most important, but it is the one which is most forgotten. Most people don't even have this in their house. That is ambient lighting. And that is lighting which is bounced off the ceiling to give a warm, soft feeling to the room. So this is used in the real world by using things called torchieres, I think that's how you pronounce it, or wall sconces, which is like a little, I don't know what you call it, like a cup against the wall. It basically shoots the light up against the ceiling. And then nowadays in modern houses, if they've actually got an architect that knows what he's doing, they'll build like this little cove little cave sort of area into the ceiling, and like along the inside of that little cove, they'll have a strip of LEDs which shine light up into that cove area, and that will create that effect as well. So the idea of it is to create a diffused, soft lighting that fills the room and removes those harsh shadows underneath people's eyes and stuff like that, and it just gives the room a very nice, warm feeling. So those are the 4 categories there. We could go into great detail on all of them, but that is the basic 4 purposes, and every room needs to have those 4 purposes covered in every single room. All right, another tip for lighting. Wow, that was a very long tip I just gave. Don't light everything, okay? You want to have shadows. Don't fall into the trap of feeling that you need to light up every single thing in the room. You need to have shadows as much as you need to have light. You can use the shadows to cast interesting shapes and patterns. So this is used a lot for like exterior lighting, where you've got trees or plants outside a building. You can shine a blue light up underneath the plants against a bland, boring wall, and suddenly you've got this really nice, interesting texture on the wall. So that's used a lot by professional lighting designers, and it creates a very nice looking effect. Humans are most comfortable around... Oh, I forgot to do that little button there. 2,800 degrees Kelvin. So that is basically the warmth of a candle, like that type of color. And in this example on the right-hand side, that's probably the closest as well. It's a very warm, orangey, reddish sort of light. And it's ones that we're most comfortable with, presumably because it's the most similar to a fire. So sort of like, it's what we're most we're most comfortable around. It's what we're most used to. People hate that cold fluorescent lighting, which is in offices. So it's really bad to live in Korea because that's pretty much all they've got here. Yeah, I tell you what, it's hard to find 2,800 degrees Kelvin anywhere in Korea. I don't know what it is, but they really love white lighting, and it really wears your eyes out. Anyway, for exterior shots, a great time to shoot, this is what a lot of architecture photographers do, is they shoot during what is called the blue hour. So that is the hour after sunset where the light is blue and you've got like this evening glow, and you can turn the lights on the building on, and that way you can see the exterior of the building as well as the interior, because generally during the day the windows are black because the lighting is too bright, and then at nighttime the environment is black because it's nighttime and you can only see inside. So this blue hour is like the only time where you can see both the exterior and the interior. So that's kind of cool. So it's like a 30-minute window or something where architecture photographers have to try and get in there and get the photograph in that time. Kind of interesting. Anyway, moving on. Camera. This one is very, very important. As I said before, it sort of like almost trumps all the others. Like if you get all the others right and then you mess this up, then you're going to have a failed image. It's capturing the building or room in an appealing way. Because really, at the end of the day, all you've got is the image, and essentially the viewer just has that image to get an idea of the room. And if you've placed the camera in a weird way or used an odd lens, you're going to ruin all the good work you've done. So here's 5 tips. First of all, there are 3 different styles to architecture photography. There is documentive, artistic, and abstract. Documentive is that sterile, like 100% accurate representation, like trying to capture this is like what the building looks like from the outside, etc. Artistic, this is the one that a lot of people love, as 3D artists, we love to create an emotional looking image, and it's just getting the lighting right, and it's the most fun. So this is the one that you will generally use when it comes to architecture rendering. And then the final one is abstract, and this is one generally used by edgy photographers. It's like when you like zoom in on an interesting shape in the room, or like a shadow that's cast underneath a stairwell or something like that, to the point where you can't actually almost tell that the image came from architecture. It's more just like a pretty image, like really edgy sort of. So that one's fun to do as well, but the majority of what you'll be doing is probably the second one, which is artistic photography. Okay, another tip: 35 millimeters, the lens size of the camera, is most comfortable to the human eye. And that's really convenient because that's the default camera lens size of Blender. So I'm kind of wondering if that was deliberate, whoever coded Blender and made that the default lens. But anyways, they say as a rule, you shouldn't go underneath 30 millimeters for your camera when you're doing architecture photography. And that's especially true for interiors. People just love to use really wide angle lens to try and capture the entire room. But that's a very common mistake a lot of people fall into, using a very wide angle lens. So try and keep it neat. Try and focus on something. Don't try and throw everything into the viewer's eyes at once. Every image needs negative space to breathe. So that's areas of white, essentially, or areas of low visual interest. You can't have a lot of patterns and chaos everywhere. It needs to have areas to breathe. So exterior shots are great because you've got the sky, but for interior, try and have some areas of a bare wall, a bare floor, or something like that to balance out the visual interest. Fourth one, this one could almost be at the top. You want to focus on telling a story. If you're doing that second category, the artistic one, this is like creating an emotion with an image, creating a story. So think about, the mood that you want your viewer to feel when they're looking at the image. Do you want them to feel like they want to be in that room? Do you want them to have like a memory of, I don't know, when they went on holiday once and they were gazing out of the window, or like a rainy afternoon, something like that. Just some ideas. Like, don't just try and copy other images that other people have done. Focus on that story, and the rest will sort of all come from that. And then finally, this is just as a general tip. Read any book on photography and you will get so many tips. It's just crazy. Like, this doesn't just apply to architecture. This applies to 3D art in general. At the moment you start reading books on photography, you will help yourself out immensely in your 3D art career, because it applies 100% to 3D artwork, any book on photography. And it was like a big realization moment for me when I started reading books on photography. It was like every page was just gold. You're just picking up tips left, right, and center. So just do yourself a favor. I mean, if you don't have the money, go to a library, just start reading books on photography and you'll be amazed at what you'll learn. Finally, post-processing. Okay. Adding the finishing touches to an image, right? This is one that a lot of people are curious about. You see images like this one on the right here, the before and after, and you're like, wow, what am I missing out on? Well, the thing is, post-processing isn't necessary, believe it or not. A lot of people use it if they're adhering to a tight deadline and they need to just, fix up a few elements here and there. So a lot of people, especially 3D Max users and stuff like that, I guess because they don't have a compositor built in. I could be wrong, but a lot of other people like to use post-processing, but something I've learned is that it's not that important. It does play a part though. So here are some 5 tips for you. First of all, you need to have a reason. Don't copy other people blindly. You need to have a reason behind everything you're doing. So don't just copy what other people have done. That's just the biggest trap to fall into. The biggest reason to use post-processing is to mimic a camera. So basically, when you take a photograph with a camera, it comes built in with all of these irregularities and faults, such as lens distortion, chromatic aberration, lens flare, all that kind of stuff that just happens with a camera naturally. It won't happen in your render. When you hit render, it's just coming out with a 100% accurate sterile image, which will need effects applied to it in order to mimic the look of a camera. So this was used in this example right here, like to blow out the windows, to create lens flares on the light sources there, etc. Color grading. This is one a lot of people are curious about, and generally color grading is used for changing a mood. A lot of people think that they need to use color grading because it's just what everybody does, but you can do equally the same amount of work with just your lighting setup and the lighting choices that you use as you can in post-processing. A lot of people do it in the post-processing stage because it's a lot easier to get immediate feedback and just know what colors work, but it's not necessary. But again, color grading is very useful for changing a mood. I said this before, don't blindly copy others. It's just a really bad trap to get into, and it's one I have to keep reminding myself. And finally, it's not always necessary. You don't need it for every scene. Some of the scenes that I've put in the Architecture Academy trailer have had no post-processing, although most of them have, for basically mimicking a camera, such as depth of field and other things like that. But that's it. That is architecture rendering workflow in a nutshell. So again, I go into a lot more detail inside the Architecture Academy. There's a video on each one of these topics in far more detail. But that's it in a nutshell, a drive-by version of the fundamentals of architecture. So now that you've learnt all that, I know some of you are probably itching to get started. So you might be wondering, Andrew, where do I start? How can I get cracking? Well, I've got something for you. It's a little present. I've got a starter pack. So right underneath this video, ta-da, there's a little word art there for you. There's a link where you can download a starter pack. Now this starter pack has got a bunch of models and textures from the Architecture Academy that I'm giving to you for free. All you need to do is just put in your email into this newsletter box, and then I'll send that starter pack directly to your inbox, and you can start using those models. So this is just a few models just to start playing around with, just to experiment. And I just encourage you to have fun and just do something cool with this starter pack, because I mean, you know, don't wait till tomorrow to get started. Essentially, you can start work right now as homework. So go ahead. There's a link underneath this video, as I said, to download that and get cracking on that. And that's pretty much the end of this video. So coming up, I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how to make actually that scene that you can see right there in the starter pack. So we're going to be using all the models from the starter pack. So I'm going to be doing a tutorial on that very shortly. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this complete introduction to architecture, and stay tuned for more.